Hi all, this is Brian from Masterpiece Miniatures. I'm going to be doing a painting tutorial today. There are a whole lot of painting tutorials out there already, so I'm not going to do too many of these, but I'm going to cover a couple of the topics that I see lacking. One of those is lighting. Now, I don't mean lighting your miniatures for pictures. I mean applying light and shadow in your painting. I notice a lot of flat-looking miniatures, and I'd like to help fix that. So today we're going to talk about light and shadow in your miniature painting, and we're going to start with contrast. I'm going to start by defining contrast, and then we'll talk about the different kinds of light sources and how it looks on a 3D object, and then we'll start going through some practical application.
What is contrast and why is it important? Well, contrast is just the visual difference between two areas. Contrast is incredibly important in visual art because the human eye is drawn to it. A sea of sameness is visually boring, and we pass over it very quickly. However, as soon as we introduce a little bit of contrast, the eye is immediately drawn to it. There are three main types of contrast: value, hue, and saturation. Hue or color contrast is the opposites on the color wheel: red versus green, purple versus yellow, etc. I'll talk about that in a separate video. The second and least used is saturation contrast. This is the difference between a very bright neon blue and a pastel grayish blue. The use of this scale is mainly as a whole in a monochrome picture. You don't want a lot of saturation contrast, so if you're doing pastels, go full pastel. The best and trickiest form of contrast is what we're going to talk about in this video: value contrast. Value contrast is white versus black and the shades of gray in between. There are not 50, there are in fact 30 shades of gray that the human eye can differentiate. A mix of hue and value contrast is where the money is in visual art. Value contrast could be used simply to help in color selection, dark green versus light green for instance, but it's most striking to use as a representation of light and shadow. To understand how to properly apply highlights and shade to a model, you have to understand how light reflects off objects in space. Let's start with one simple light, an area or direction in light representing sunlight. Here are three basic 3D objects simply lit with just the one light. You should note first the direction of the light. Artistic convention is, when in doubt, light a model from the upper left. Nobody really knows why, it's just what makes most people most comfortable. Upper right is okay, but anything else, like underlighting or object source lighting, should be used for a specific effect and with full intent only. Next, note the way the light hits these objects. You'll note on the pyramid and the cube that no surface is exactly the same shade of gray. This is very important. In miniature painting, the usual go-to is edge highlighting. Edge highlighting is done as a cheat to increase the contrast between two panels of a miniature, because at the scale we're working with, from across the table, a human eye isn't as good as picking out that level of detail. However, if you notice that this is the way it works in reality versus edge highlighting, then you can use this knowledge to choose different values of color to denote different panels or parts of the model that should be in shadow, especially if you're going with a big model like a tank or something like that. Now let's take a closer look at the sphere. You'll actually see 4 levels of shadow if you look for them. First, we can identify 2 main colors, the light color and the shadow color, but within these you're going to see a lighter light, that's the highlight or specular highlight, and then the lighter part of the shadow. This is actually reflected light. The lightest light, or the specular, is where you would go for layering or edge highlighting. The deepest shadow is where I'd be looking to place a wash. So let's begin with the practical applications. This here is a Volkite Berserker of the Fire Slayer range. You'll notice what I did is undercoat it in white, and then I just put one spotlight on it. There's no other lights in the room. You'll see here, if you look closely, the 2 layers of shadow, as well as a bit of core shadow and the specular highlighting. Now the light is going to be a little strong because this is a pretty bright light, but this is going to be the reference for where we're going to put the washes and highlights in the miniature. You can see, for instance, that the right arm is going to be in a lot of light, whereas the left arm is not, and the braids on the beard are going to be lighter than the rest of the beard, and then the lower half of the body is not in light at all. So with this case, if you go with edge highlighting, I wouldn't highlight that lower beard at all. I wouldn't highlight the loincloth or the right leg or left leg there, or left arm or anything like that, just because there's not going to be any highlighting on it. So here you see the same model base coated, and it's not as easy to see, but do try and still pick out where the light is hitting the model. It's still from the top left. The right arm is still going to be a lot lighter than the left arm, and the left leg is almost entirely in shadow here. So let's start applying a wash. Given that the shadow is going to be on the lower right of us, we're always going to wash up. That's the easy, quick way to shade. Wash up so that the wash gets into the lower parts of the model and sticks to it, so it emulates the natural light. And here I'm getting under the left bicep there, and I'm just going to take away the wash from the top surface, because that's going to be less of shadow than the other. And then the lower part of the right leg is going to be almost entirely in shadow, so I'm going to let it pool up there, and then just follow the curvature of the muscles for the rest of it. Again, wash up. The armpit, of course, is almost always going to be in shadow, so again, let a big glop of it pool there. That's good, it's natural. The face, I'm only going to touch the right side, and I'm going to put a lot on the left side because the left side is in shadow. The middle of the back is another good place to pool a wash. That's where some of the deepest shadow is going to be on the miniature. And of course, under the legs will be, again, deepest shadow. Here the washing is complete. And it doesn't look odd or anything because we washed up. It's in the shadow. It looks exactly like it should. So now we're going in and applying the light. So with Kizflav Chef, I will highlight only the parts that were going to be in the actual light. So of course his nose and cheekbone. And then remember, the one arm was almost all in light. So we're going to get most of that following the definition of the muscles. And this is pretty much all I'm going to do on that arm. I'm not going to go underneath it because that's in shadow. The light isn't hitting it, and so I don't want to put any highlighting there. And here I can just double check the lighting because my bright light is right there. And I'm only really just going to hit the tips of that left arm. And then we'll get the right leg. Again, most of this is going to be in light, so I'm going to highlight most of it following the curvature of the muscles. The one good thing about Games Workshop sculpts is that they are very good sculpts. If you're not familiar with anatomy, you just follow the raised areas that they give you. And then we'll hit the very tip of his left leg there which, because it's back, is going to be in the light. And that's really all the highlighting that I'm going to do for the flesh parts of that model. The rest of it's in shadow. I don't want to pick it out. Now when we're going into the beard for the dry brushing, the opposite of washing up is dry brushing down. Because the light is hitting from the upper left, we're going to move our brush from the upper left to the lower right. We're going to highlight the one side a lot of the crest there. We're going to highlight the braids of the mustache much more than we're going to highlight the interior of the beard. And then we're only going to briefly touch the opposite side of the crest. Because it's not getting any light, we just want to provide a little more contrast. And now for the gold bits, we'll put out my favorite special tools, the good old metallic Sharpies. And we'll use the same method as we did the dry brush. Just brush down with it. The tip is nice and fat, so it's not going to get into the details. And again, we're only going to hit the spots that are going to be in the light, not the whole thing. The gold metallic Sharpie happens to match Liberator Gold exactly, just for your reference. I find that's handy to know. The silver one matches Rune Fang Steel, and in fact is just a little bit brighter. Now we go in with the silver just to dab at the specular highlights. This is minimal use, just to pick out where the light would really shine off the gold. The silver edge highlighting is really a less is more philosophy. The less you put on there, the shinier the object looks. And that's really it. That's this miniature done in a quick and dirty, lit way, so that you have a good three-dimensional effect. And here are 3 of the models done, all in that same method, same colors, and you can see them from a little bit farther away, and depth that it shows. So to sum up, edge highlighting looks good for the most part, but the larger the surface, the more you really want to pay attention to where the light is hitting the model, and so that you don't highlight everything and make a 3D object look flat. The easiest way to do this is to wash up and dry brush down. Other than that, it's just kind of up to you. This is, of course, my opinion, but I find it works, and I'll continue to do it, obviously. My next painting video in a month or so will be on how to pick what colors to pick. And if you have any questions on advanced color theory or fine art or anything like that, you just let me know and I will do a video on it. Thanks all. See you next time.